Good evening and very welcome to our VBS webinar, where we take you behind the scenes of quite a moment in the fight against corruption. So we all know the story of the VBS Bank, and my colleagues, Pauli van Wyk, Neesa, Moodley, Queenin, Masuabi, are going to answer all your questions, but first, a few of mine. Very welcome, colleagues. So I feel in the VBS chairperson, Tshifhiwa Matodzi's statement, witness statement and plea deal, that we finally have a smoking gun. Although, Pauli, I know that you provided many for us. I thought I might ask you to start with what piqued your interest in this relatively small bank, and what has held your interest in VBS for, I think, 5 years now, or perhaps it's a little longer.
Yeah, it starts to be 6 years now. It's a long time. So, Ferial, thank you. I first saw colleagues at City Press writing about this, and I started wondering, how do you, and this was in 2017, before the bank was put under liquidation, and so there was just an inkling that something is wrong after the curatorship. And Devald van Rensburg and Sipho Mosando was writing about it. And I was wondering, how do you steal a bank that's so well regulated, supposedly, into insolvency? And that stayed with me. And those nerdy questions always piques my interest. And then a strange thing happens. Suddenly, Floyd Shivambu started attacking Ishmael Mamoniat in Parliament. That was the non-Indian and non-African comment that everyone spoke about. And it was strange because we couldn't understand what the political move would be behind it. And that triggered a number of sources to whisper to me, the ANC and the EFF had something to do with VBS, but there were more. There were auditors and PIC people and, a lot of people that kept the secret. And for an investigator like me who follows the money, that is a complete dream. And at the time, you will remember that the EFF specifically were heavy on their anti-corruption campaigns. They just got President Jacob Zuma out in February that year, and then Nhlanhla Nene in later that year. It was, I think, a day or two before we received the Mutau report that investigated the crimes at VBS. And then lastly, the woman that was sleeping outside the bank on the stoep for 2 nights in the cold in Thohoyandou. And I just thought, justice need to be done here.
And Pauli, so you wrote those fascinating series where you really showed how the money flow happened by using the credit cards of the EFF's linked companies. That's a very broad summary, and showed how they were spending wildly on that. How did you put that story together, and what pressure did you come under?
Yeah, so the pressure was intense, mostly because you're always worried about making a mistake. And the chance of making a mistake there was quite big because there's so many facts and so many fine-tuning to do. And I mean, if you make one small mistake, it will be the end of you as a journalist. But that specific investigation was just following the bank statements. Is what the bank statements tell you. Where did the money go? Painstakingly, like I became the spreadsheet queen, Ferial. Everything I retyped into spreadsheets, analyzed it for weeks. Then you have to go and verify, because bank statements don't always tell the entire story. You have to verify, you have to ask questions. There are unfortunately secrets that I still to this day haven't solved. So there's so much more, I think, that the Hawks and the prosecuting authority can tell us that I never could solve those secrets. So even though we at Daily Maverick did show a lot, there's so much more that we still don't know.
Neesa, let's pick it up with you. So last week, the witness statement of Tshifhiwa Matodzi comes out, and it's the plea deal. It gives us a lot. It's a gold mine, I feel. What does that witness statement prove, and what additional information does it put into the public square?
So it was quite a comprehensive document. It was like 70 pages, and apparently it took him about 3 weeks to draft this document. I assume that he painstakingly went back over details and had to recollect years and months and who and what and how and why. And he detailed all of that. I thought it was very interesting how he very bluntly said, these were the people at the top, and this is what this person was doing, and this is what the cover up was, and this is the role. And these are the shell companies that each person in management set up to facilitate the illicit flow of money. But then when it came to his family, his writing changes almost a little bit. It's a little bit like, my mom had these companies, but she was a director, but she didn't know anything. I did everything, and he tries to assume responsibility. It was a little bit sad in a way.
You found it sad. What kind of person does he come across as? Does he feel genuinely apologetic and shamed by what he did?
No, I think initially he outright blank denied that he had anything to do with it. He tried to deny culpability, and now he's come forward, and I suspect he's only come forward with a statement now because there's something in it for him, i.e. probably a reduced sentence and maybe even leniency for his family members. And there's some very startling allegations, specifically the one against Dondo Mogajani, who's the former Director General at Treasury. And you have to wonder, this seems very much to be a person who was operating all along for his own gain. He had no thought about what he was doing. He understood fully what he was doing as a chartered accountant, but there was no real remorse. And I don't really see that remorse in the statement, other than one brief paragraph at the beginning.
Thank you very much. So, Queenin, I'm sure that you've also been reading the statement, and as a political animal, I mean, politicians are front and center this story. There's obviously, as Pauli has followed for many years, the EFF leaders, Julius, Malema, and Floyd, Shivambu, but there's also in the senior leaders of the ANC in Limpopo, like Danny Masiza. There is William Kize, the former health minister and former treasurer general of the ANC, who is said to have also received some of the VBS money. Do you think that there will be political ramifications from this story?
I think at this point, each political party is really backing their members. Shockingly, we've been hearing from Limpopo, who's had a roadshow on most television and radio stations about the matter. And I've been tracking all of his interviews. What's been very interesting to me particularly is how Limpopo has had to do some verbal gymnastics. Initially going on Newsroom Africa and saying that and defending the possibility that the EFF might have received this money, saying yes, they did receive it, but the money does not necessarily equate to a bribe. And when we look back and see the reason why it could be a bribe is because obviously the EFF was really speaking sharply against the loan that VBS had given to former President Jacob Zuma, and all of a sudden they themselves are then involved with VBS, and all of a sudden they are quiet about it. So it's been interesting to see how parties are handling it. In terms of the ANC has its step-aside rule, and they are very clear on the fact that members need to be charged first. So at this point, it seems their hands are tied, but the ANC in Limpopo did mention that they would be having a provincial executive committee meeting where they'd be discussing not only Danny Masiza, who's the former treasurer of the province, but also Florence Radzelani, who's the current deputy chair of the province, the ANC in Limpopo, and is also an MEC in the province. So this is very serious, but we'll have to see how it plays out throughout.
Thank you. Pauli, I remember the day after the investigation broke, I happened to be at an EFF press conference for another reason, and you were there as well. My goodness, you came under a lot of heat and fire. And also I remember some kind of jocular responses from our own colleagues. What was it like sitting there that day, and what were they telling us? If you can just go back a little bit. You on mute, Pauli? You're on mute?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, it was a very strange and disjointed and dishonest press conference. The thing about investigative journalists are often that we ask questions that we already know the answer to, and it's an answer or a tactic that we learned from investigators in business, but it's also a tactic that I know the political investigators and political journalists often use. So probing about things that you already know what's going on, just to see what the other side is. And this was, so I'm asking them, did you ever receive money from Mahuna or Grand Azania or Schameka projects, which were the three companies that channeled money directly towards Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu? And it was startling to see them blatantly lying about it. And then obviously fudging the money that went into Floyd Shivambu's private bank account, which we later, SARS proved that. I mean, there's a judgment from SARS about that. It's not something that we can deny. It was discussed in Parliament as well. But those things do take like 6 years to come out sometimes because we don't always have the proof, or, the stories just take a very long time to tie up. I did hope that people would perhaps be more logical about it and a little bit more questioning about it. But I do think the EFF now, like the ANC, had lost that veneer of credibility. People back then in 2018 were in a different mind space, and maybe Queenin can help us if that's her viewpoint as well. I think they were in a different mind space and the EFF was seen as heroes. They weren't seen as people who were quite possibly corrupt and stole from the people that they grew up with. I mean, Julius and Floyd come from Limpopo, and not only from Limpopo, they live a few kilometers from Thohoyandou. So, but yeah, I see a more critical view now, and that is heartening.
Thank you. So Neesa, you are our eyes and ears of the Daily Maverick, but also of the broader public out there. What struck you about the VBS story and about its victims? Because you read about financial scams all the time.
I think for me, and I wear the personal finance hat very also. For me, I think first of the savings conundrum in South Africa, where we have very few people who are saving, and then you have people who are really putting in the effort and trying to scrape together what little they have, and they get robbed by people who are just selfishly using the money to fund these lavish lifestyles. It's really heartbreaking because on the one hand, we're trying so hard to encourage South Africans to save more and do the right thing. And then when they do, they get robbed and ripped off. And then there's this distrust between South Africans and financial institutions, and it becomes more entrenched every time a story like this comes out, because then the perception is, well, why must I hand my money over? Because I don't know who's actually going to be benefiting from it, if not myself.
Thank you. I wanted to get that on. For any of you, before we move to our audience questions, in an ethical, moral and political universe, what should happen? I mean, what should the response of the EFF and the ANC be to a case like this, where the poorest South Africans, and I read a very evocative interview with the founding director of VBS, and he said he felt that Mr. Matodzi should have received a much bigger sentence than the one that he has ended up, because they themselves felt so cheated and shamed by what had happened to ordinary people and to people's money, municipalities' money in Limpopo and elsewhere. Any of you want to take a stab at that before we move on?
I think from an ethical point, even with the ANC saying that their step aside guidelines are what is ethical, I think they need to kind of overlook that, because I think when it comes to how it's affected ordinary people on the ground, it changes the dynamic completely. I also look at how the ANC got most of its support from Limpopo. That is their stronghold, and I think because of that, the ANC should be taking this way more seriously than they are. I mean, when I was doing the VBS stories around how it would affect the ANC politically around the time, a lot of people were very disgruntled by the party. But despite this, we saw traditional leaders in Limpopo still backing the party and still making sure that they get support. So I think for both the EFF and ANC, they need to take a stronger stance. But what's unique about the EFF is that we don't really know what their rules say internally about situations like this. We haven't really seen any of their big guns being disciplined internally, definitely not the president or the deputy. So I think it will be very interesting maybe to look into what can be done and what their rules say internally.
So I remember we had a discussion where you said when the cost of living is so high and it's really about survival, issues like state capture and corruption, they don't really make much of a dent in how parties do. And yet the EFF plateaued in this election. Do you think that it's conspicuous consumption, the way it lives, the VBS story, do you think it had an impact, or was that more MK?
I don't really think that it really had an impact. I think definitely MK, and I think that, remember, the EFF did lose one of its very senior members in Limpopo, Josie Butani, who was the one who actually formed the EFF in the province. He was the brains behind how the machinery was working in the province. And the moment they lost him, well, Josie left with so many people from the EFF. So did other members from Limpopo. And I think obviously it was because of a breakdown in the relationship between Josie Butani and Julius Malema. I think that played a huge role, and it was a big win for the ANC. But I don't think there were any other factors. I think the VBS factor had disappeared for many political, even for the ANC itself, because the likes of Florence Radzelane could still be at the forefront of the campaign.
Thank you very much, Queenin. Let's go straight to questions. So from Suresh Chetu, good evening. Amazing work, DM. Is SARS possibly going to target individuals in respect of whether they paid their dues? Either Pauli or Neesa. JC DeVille, what is the NPA's position? The NPA is very cross about the leaking of that statement. It said the Hawks as well. And then Mark Burke, were the credit card records for Sigameka in the public domain? If not, are they now? Let's go those three, Neesa and Pauli.
Okay, I'll take SARS and the credit card records because I know I have direct knowledge there.
Yes.
We already have evidence of SARS tightening the screws around Tshifhiwa. So SARS liquidated Tshifhiwa because it didn't pay any tax. And so it got liquidated. And then SARS followed the money towards Grand Azania, and the same thing happened. It couldn't pay its tax and it was liquidated. And in the back of that court case, very helpfully, SARS attached some of Floyd Shivambu's personal private wealth FNB bank statements. And that showed us that 180,000 Rand, apart from what I said, so this is despite everything, is he received right from VBS money into his personal bank account. And at last we could say, okay, but you can't really deny this anymore. So SARS will now have to look at Floyd Shivambu, at his tax affairs, and we presume that they are, and we'll probably hear from that soon. With Mahuna, we don't know as much. We haven't seen any court case against Mahuna. That's still a blank statement for us. The credit card details of Tshifhiwa is not public. It's something that we have, and I can't make it public because it has markings on that may reveal a source. And the press code is very strict about these things, that if you have information that can reveal a source, you can't publish it or you can't use it. We have a very strong obligation to shield people from harm. And therefore, we didn't. The only thing that we did say is that we received it. The information comes from the Tshifhiwa credit card statement.
Thank you. Neesa, what's the NPA position? And then if you just can take a follow-up, where was FICA in all of this?
Well, that's a very good question. So the NPA position is that they're very upset about the so-called leaked document. But I think one of our viewers actually points out the alternative view that if it was an affidavit that was admitted in court at the sentencing, then surely it's part of court records. And then how leaked is it? Or was the NPA so naive to think that nobody would look through the court records and see this document? So Pauli's laughing at me. And then the other question, the other comment I want to make, not on one of those questions, but I think this actually highlights the importance of those lifestyle audits that SARS has been very unpopular for. Because if they had done those lifestyle audits 5-6 years ago on all these individuals, surely they would have picked up that, I mean, you know, with Matodzi's sister, for example, she's earning 30,000 Rand a month and had a loan approved on income of 107,000. That's just no way. Sorry, what was the last question, Ferial?
It was, where was FICA in all this? So if it should have been getting STRs, suspicious transaction records from the banks. Has it done its work in analyzing those? Because there was some critique during state capture years that it didn't really, huh?
Yes,
or at least it didn't tell us it was. Huh?
I wonder sometimes if, you know, FICA hasn't become almost like a tick box approach and there isn't somebody actually interrogating the information that comes through, because it's not enough to just have a tick box approach. You've got to look behind the numbers at what's driving those numbers. And that's where the work needs to come in. And maybe that's where we are failing a little bit.
Thank you. Actually, I do want to do just, is it correct what Solimoeng is asking us here? Do you, Daily Maverick, ever wonder why the NPA never acts on the evidence you reveal, or at least use it to conduct deep dives on the exposed crimes? It would seem to me that on this one, there was good work between the Hawks and the NPA. Pauli, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. In this case, there's also a private-public partnership going on, and that's clearly very helpful. So just a background on that, the Reserve Bank appointed advocate Terry Mutau and law firm Worksmans to do the initial investigation for the Reserve Bank. And it was an investigation to inform whether allegations of corruptions were really true. And it turned out to be very true and worse than anyone thought, and they put the bank into liquidation after. And that same report has been used by the authorities to build on that in terms of the criminal cases. Now, we know that firstly, 8 people were charged with crimes, in which Matodzi and Philip Tritter, the CFO, were 2 and has now been found guilty and is in jail. So Philip Tritter, you earlier said, is out of jail already recently, and which I think is disappointing as well, that it wasn't a longer sentence, especially for the psychological harm, I think, of the victims and the amount of problems that he caused. I think, you know, it would have been good for justice for them to sit longer. In the same thing for Matodzi. I do suspect the reason why we're not seeing that is because they will be state witness, and that takes us further on this question of whether the Hawks and the prosecuting authority are doing their work. It's incredibly difficult, we have to accept that, to turn crooks. 2 crooks have been turned. So we need to
credit and Matodzi now.
Yes. And we have to give credit to the Hawks and this private-public partnership and to the prosecuting authority. It's difficult work, it's hard work. These affidavits, you can see a lot of work, painstaking work has gone into it. I think they could have done much more, much quicker, but here we have to applaud them on at least getting there, even though they're perhaps a little slow.
Thank you. Queenin, a political question, a question about democracy. What does all this corruption do? What impact does it have on democracy and people's involvement? So almost 23 million people who could vote didn't vote. And that told me something about turning away from the system, not really believing it. The most common question that we get at Daily Maverick is, okay, so when are some of these big crooks going to be in orange overalls? Do you think it has an impact on the democratic fabric of our country?
For sure, because I've seen how the trust deficit has just grown between the public and particularly political parties. And you see how ordinary community members have started to formalize themselves into groups, into political parties, especially, and this started especially at local level. At some point, people leaving these big political parties because they don't think it's viable, or community organizations starting to participate in local elections to make sure that they fill in the gaps, or feeling as if they could do better. So every single time I hear news like this, I do know this is a huge deterrent for young people, for all South Africans, in fact, when it comes to voting, because when you hear that the largest party and the fourth largest party in the country are both somehow implicated in this, you start asking yourself questions. Who is the better devil? Who is the better candidate to run the country? So I do think it really impacts our outlook as citizens, and I think certainly just widens the trust deficit even further.
Thank you, Queen. From Nicola, what's the status of the other senior VBS execs, I think, and also the Vele investment executives? Anybody know that?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one. Some of them are accused, like Danny Msiza, Kabelo Matsepe, then the KPMG guy that I wrote a lot about, Sipho Malaba, the PIC directors that I wrote a lot about, Ernest Nasani and Paul Magula. They are the co-accused in that 8-man case. It was all men, weirdly. Yes. 8-man case that we referenced earlier. And that need to be now taken to conclusion. And it's important that Philip Trieter and Matodzi turned, because they will be state witnesses. And we expect them to be good witnesses, because they were in the room, so to speak. Matodzi was the directing hand, and Philip just did everything he was told. He was given bribes to do so, not even a lot. I mean, which particularly shows us that.
How much did he get?
5 million. So, but I must caution, he's not as guilty as only 5 million. He's very guilty. What he did was atrocious, because he's the financial officer. It was his fiduciary duties, and there Neesa is much more of an expert than I am. But the CFO is so important in the wealth of a company, not even in the financial wealth, but in terms of their fiduciary duties, keeping everything right, keeping everything legal, and ensuring that there's no weird shenanigans going on. And the moment that there was even a suspicion of wrongdoing, it was Philip's his fiduciary duty to report it to the office or to the authorities, and it didn't happen. So that's why I earlier said I would have think it more just for him to be handed a longer sentence and served a longer sentence. So there's also a number of people from the municipalities charged, and they will also have to be put through trial. So I presume that at least a decade of VBS trials are ahead of us. But it's important for justice, and I really support, if it's a painstaking investigation and if it's a slow process, I support it as long as it happens.
Thank you very much. Neesa, when you heard today in Sowetan broke the story, I think, that Philip Trieter, the former CFO of VBS Bank, is out on parole. I think he was jailed in 2022, so that's not a very long time served. He probably is going to turn state. What were your views of that, and what else could happen to him? You're on mute, Neesa?
Sorry, I was saying, I have to wonder, because he effectively served he got a 7-year sentence. He served 3.5 years, 3 years, 6 months, and he's out. And then it's disheartening, because it's kind of like, that's barely a slap on the wrist. I mean, and then where's the deterrent for other CFOs to say this is not behavior that we will tolerate? I think it should be a much stronger sentence and a much more visible show of force from the NPA and from our legal system to say that actually we won't put up with this. This is not okay. And like Pauli was saying, he signed off. He was the final, like the signature. He was the one who who oversaw the books and oversaw the financial reports and understood that things were being cooked and being made up, and just went along with it, facilitated it even. And I think he actually complained at one point to say that he only got 5 million for his efforts. And relatively speaking, I can see why, because everybody else got huge amounts. But really, it just boggles the mind.
Neesa, what are the other countervailing forces which could also say to him, hey, you didn't do your work here? Is it the FCA? If he's a chartered accountant, I don't know if he is. Would it be SAICA? Who else can bring an action against him to ensure that he doesn't just walk into another cushy CEO's job sometime?
So I think it would be SAICA as an industry body, because I'm assuming he would have some kind of accountancy qualification. And then I know that in the financial services sector, usually you get debarred, which means you cannot work as an advisor. And I would hope that there would be something similar in his case, and that this will follow him, hopefully, and he will not be employed in financial services anymore. That's another thing I have to wonder. We always say you have a credit record, and if you're going to work in financial services industry, they look at your credit record, because if you can't manage your own money, then the thinking is you won't be able to manage somebody else's money. So, I mean, what were the checks against all these individuals who were given these high positions of power at financial institutions? And shouldn't there be some record somewhere to make sure that they don't work at another financial service institution down the line?
Thank you. Queenin, earlier this year, Julius, Malema and the EFF held that amazing scissor lift rally at FNB Stadium last year, or earlier this year, I can't remember, late last year. And people came there from all over the country, and it was the talk of the town. So many DM audience and insiders joining us are saying, does this information get to their supporters? Does it move them at all? Are we doing a good enough job of telling the story right at the political grassroots?
Yeah, so I think it's very important for each news agency to really delve deep into the story and, tell it like it is, because it's important for voters to know exactly who they're voting for and what it is they're up to, especially because the EFF has been at the forefront, or it's in its initial stages, was really at the forefront of, fighting corruption and calling out, the former president. They've been at the forefront of the Phala matter, and I think it's only fair that as they have called out other political parties and political figures, I think it's up to the media to really delve deep into it at all levels, I think. And, maybe publications are different. We have different readerships, but I think when you look at how the media has taken up the story, I do believe that somehow it will trickle down to EFF supporters. They will be aware of this. And I think, in politics, you can never hide such information. It will definitely come up in parliament every now and then. It will definitely be a jab at the EFF every single chance opposition parties or their rivals have an opportunity. So I do feel like the media has a huge responsibility to make sure that people are informed about this and that we are telling it as accurately as possible.
Thank you, Queen. I'll stay with you. You covered Limpopo quite a bit. These are the poorest of the poor areas, the poorest municipalities. Tell us a bit about being in all parts of Limpopo. I mean, it needs this money.
Yes, for sure. I think, when you look at communities in Limpopo, very rural communities, right? Communities that have a lot of stokvels, burial societies, kind of working together when it comes to finances. And when you look particularly at the direct relationship with VBS, you see how important the bank was for the community members. I mean, especially older people, those who have invested their pension funds into the mutual bank. So, it's communities that really do need the money and were very trusting of this institution to make sure that their money is kept safe. You look also at the kind of communities, as I said before, communities mostly that are in support of parties like the ANC and EFF. Their constituencies being mostly poor black people in the country. So it's quite telling when you look at that, when you look at election results throughout the years, who's voting for the ANC and EF, definitely people from Limpopo. So yeah, it's quite a clear picture when you look at that and you see the direct link with the bank, how disappointing it is that we are getting such information about what's happening there.
Thank you. Pauli, Neesa, several questions about whether we can get the money back. I mean, I think in quite a few cases, that's going to mean liquidating hotels, very fancy clothes. Do we get the money back, Pauli?
So in liquidation proceedings around the globe, it's not only a problem here, you often get very little back. And then we're not even starting on the liquidator's fees, which can sometimes be extortionate. And in South Africa, we definitely have a problem with that, proven history. So no, you don't. So a curator, Anush Ruplal, realized that there was actually 2.7 billion rand stolen. It was a figure that no one knew. I think Mutal and Worksman's pegged it at around 2 million rand. So he found even, and we definitely do not get all of it back. I think we'd be lucky if we get a third back. What did happen, I think, which was very smart from the liquidator Anush Ruplal, was that he went after KPMG because Sipho Malaba and another auditor just not even missed the problems. They deliberately papered over and they were severely conflicted. So they received loans and cash and all sorts of favors to just look the other way. And in the end, they signed off as the outside auditors on fast bank statements, which is criminal, and which is why they are now charged as well. So what happened is, he went after them for around 860 million rand, if I remember correctly. And this was Neesa who broke the story. It was her excellent sources that told her that, so it was a secret how much they settled for. And in the end, it was around 500 million, I think, if I remember her story correctly, which is excellent work, because without her, we wouldn't have known what that settlement was. So at least we know we have around 500 million, and then some of the money that Anush could claw back from other companies. Like Brian Shivambu had to pay back 4.5 million rand in a secret contract that he tried to keep, which became not so secret when I published it. And so he did with a number of other people too.
Thank you. Neesa, same question, and also from Zoe Lees. Have any of the victims had any compensation, or do they have to wait for the convictions and the recovery of funds?
So there was the undertaking by the South African Reserve Bank where they made available a certain amount of money, and I think it was, sorry, I can't, the figures I don't have offhand, Ferial, this case has really,
I think it's 100,000 max per depositor. Huh?
Yeah, so, and it was a fraction of what they lost. It wasn't enough to make up what they lost, really. So I think it's the wait and see game, but I really doubt that the depositors are going to get anything further out of it. I just want to say there's the viewer, Rhinus, who's asked a question that preempted my article that you will be able to read in Daily Maverick online tomorrow. But he's asked, do you think Dondo might have been slipped into the affidavit as a revenge act, or will such a statement be backed by evidence? And you absolutely have preempted what I wrote, because first of all, everybody, I think from media to general government officials, everybody was highly shocked by the inclusion of Dondo Mokajani in that affidavit. And then you have to see Dondo's very strong comeback on that. He refuted the allegation immediately. There was no hesitation. There was no trying to paper it over. And I also want to say, they say the mark of a good lie is that you include a little bit of truth to it. And so Matodzi has been very clever in saying, well, I had meetings with Dondo, and I had several meetings, and these were the meetings, and then this happened. And he did have meetings with Dondo, but the purpose of those meetings, as per Dondo's witness statement, is different to what the chairman of VBS allegations are. He was trying to infer that these meetings were dodgy and behind the scenes, and actually he was the one pushing the meetings because he was insisting that Treasury should withdraw its statement telling municipalities to stop funneling money into this bank because it was a mutual bank and they should never have been putting money in it in the first place. And I strongly feel like possibly Dondo's refusal to toe that line and to agree to that was maybe the apple that toppled the cart.
Thank you very much, Neesa. Queenin, so Christy van der Westhuizen is asking, where's Julius Malema in all of this? I mean, in the statement, he's in a penthouse suite, he's negotiating, he's selling his soul, basically. But where's he right now is, I think, what she wants to know, because he has crafted and he's still trying to craft this reputation brand as an anti-corruption campaigner.
It's not looking really good for Julius at the moment. I think what's quite telling about the situation is that he himself he hasn't said anything. He hasn't issued a statement. He has not called one of his famous press briefings to defend himself. Instead, he has sent out the Limpopo to be his foot soldier in all of this. So, throughout the saga, he's there. I think what's very interesting, I went back to just look at all the footage around, journalists asking him about VBS. And you see during the COVID time where there was a group of journalists, I don't know if you might remember, who had a one-on-one with him. And there he just, denied every single allegation. He denied receiving money from VBS. He, in fact, said that the party's treasurer general had gone through the books and that they had found that there was no deposit made to the EFF from VBS at all. And then you look at how this story has changed over time, and now recent interviews by Limpopo, one saying on Newsroom Africa, yes, we did receive this money. There's nothing untoward about it. It's normal for political parties to receive cash injections and donations. And then again this morning on the Clement Manyatela show on 702, saying that no, he's not sure whether they received the money. So it's been a really odd ride. I think Julius is in a very tight spot. I think the last time I felt as if he didn't know how to approach him at all. He needed time to digest what had happened was recently in the 2024 elections. We waited days to hear from him, whereas usually he would be out and about and ready to speak about all these issues. So you see how in the affidavit by Matodzi, he was definitely in the room when decisions were made, and they kind of was striking a deal with the EFF on how to give them these so-called donations. And then you see how now he's just disappeared at the moment. And it's really unlike Julius. We know he's one of the loudest politicians. So as a political journalist, I'm really looking forward to hearing directly from him and hearing what he has to say as a rebuttal to this affidavit.
So Pauli, I don't know about you, but when I heard those real denials and saying, well, the auditors have found that there was no deposits from VBS into EFF. Well, whoever said there was money in backpacks, very fancy ones, taken shopping, often in cash, sometimes with the card, to support a lifestyle that's completely at odds with the Bolivarian Socialist Party, the EFF said it is. How, as an investigative journalist, do you stay far from those kind of emotions that says you're lying? Because really it's just your work, the forensic work, that tells the story.
Yeah, just as an aside, I think many people forget that you edited City Press when you guys published a lot of the same, also on Julius Malema, and where you speak of the cash and the cars and the money and the clothes. It was exactly what happened in the On Point saga, that City Press under you so really, really well published to the world. And we have unfortunately very short political attention spans, I think, and maybe Queenin can tell us why, because we tend to forget things or people change our minds. And then it is hard when Julius tells you that you're Satan and he's dog whistling you, and people say that you should be raped and hanged and assassinated like Trump almost was. I mean, that was literally what happened this week. But in the end, it's also not difficult because I don't know Julius. I've met him, I think, twice, and we've spoken maybe 10 words with each other in different circumstances where it had nothing to do with VBS.
And what were those 10 words?
So he once visited not VBS. He once visited the Beeld offices when I still worked there with Adrian Basson. And so it was more about Beeld's political coverage and what his views are for the EFF. And because the EFF was a brand new party at the time, and it was sort of a roadshow. That was the first time that I personally met him. And the second was at a rally where I covered some of the politics at the time. So we never spoke about the EFF and VBS after. And that makes it easy. I have no feelings about him. And I think it's much more easy. And that's when journalists should recuse themselves and say, I can't work on this because I feel too close to this person, too angry close, or maybe you're too nice to him, or whatever that the reason might be. But when you can also not stay silent. My job is, in essence, to shine a light on the facts. And the facts I followed painstakingly, and I believe in them. I will stand in a court and explain to a judge, and I know that I will win the case. That's how strongly I believe in the evidence that I have, because I have bank statements, I have SMSs, I have documents that shows how the money flowed. You can't lie around that. You only can explain how it happened. And when you follow painstakingly the truth, it's, even biased people then can put the story together, and when you're not biased, it's much easier to do it.
Has your work been used in any of the investigations? Have you seen it used in that way? Because it's my firm opinion that many acts of justice start as works of journalism. Do you have a similar view?
I absolutely agree. We often, and there's proven fact for that, we've often in the past, other journalists in the world over and South Africa have shown the authorities what's happening. That's our core job, is to pull away the blanket. The Gupta leaks for Daily Maverick was one of those moments where we said, well, look at the evidence that we have. And in this case, I really do hope so. I hear whispers of people reading my stories diligently and going and searching for facts and for things that I unveil in all sorts of corners of government. And that's heartening to hear. I haven't seen active proof of it that I can show you now. And maybe when there's some prosecutions, we may get there at one stage.
Thank you. Neesa, public interest and a personal finance question. So how do you get the information of banking details? So if someone from Monique, if someone asks for my banking details, I would hope you can't get them. What is made available and how? And when, Neesa, do you think it becomes legitimate to pierce either the tax veil or your personal finance information?
Ideally, your personal information would be confidential, but the tax man has the right to ask, and that's third party reporting requirements, that if the bank suspects there's something untoward, or if SARS calls and says, look, Neesa's lifestyle audit doesn't match up and we want to see the bank records, then the bank has no choice but to hand those records over. How will he get the bank records? That she'll have to answer.
Pauli, you explained those were attached to a SARS case, huh?
Yeah, so some of it were attached to a SARS case. And then remember, whenever you have to apply for a home loan or whatever you need to do, you have to attach bank statements. So there's so many times in your own personal life where you give your bank statements away. So that's one way of getting them. And then we have really good sources as well in all sorts of corners. But I must also say to readers, when you are a private citizen, you're a teacher or a doctor or whatever you're doing, it's not it's not acceptable and ethical for a journalist, for example, to just publish those bank statements. And there's absolutely no reason for why we would do that unless you committed a crime and I can prove it. Then I will definitely do so, and then you have a problem. But you have a really strong defamation case against the journalist if they just, or against any person actually, because journalists are members of the public and we operate under the same laws. So yeah, if you haven't committed a crime, you don't have to worry.
So that's medical records, bank statements, everything in your private domain, highly protected unless there's a public interest mandate, and big argument to be made. Queenin, question here from someone on our chat line saying, will this benefit the ANC? Because the EFF has obviously stayed outside the GNU. Do you think this is a moment for President Ramaphosa to consolidate his final term and make this GNU work? Because to be honest, he hasn't been that great in his first term.
Yeah, I think it is going to benefit the ANC quite a bit. I was even thinking about it now because I've reported so much about David Makura's research into whether they should work with the EFF or DA, and how he has already said that, the EFF is, a walking red flag in many ways, highlighting how unreliable they are as partners and how unethical they can be in some instances. So I felt it was a big victory for the ANC, and that they chose the route that they did with the DA and other political parties instead of choosing the EFF simply because, they seem to have similar policies and seem to be more aligned to them. So definitely a big win for the ANC there. I do think then it does put the GNU cabinet at a better position. The EFF definitely is on the back foot. They were supposed to come in as the strong opposition alongside the MK party in parliament, hold the ANC into account, but now they have to deal with their own controversy just at the beginning of this new administration, which is going to be strenuous on them. So yeah, definitely, I think that it should give the GNU cabinet, some kind of boost politically. It should also, like you said, the first term for President Cyril Ramaphosa was not exactly, exciting or great, but I think it should put him in a better position politically, and also build confidence for the GNU cabinet to, march ahead with their plans for the 7th administration.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you saw, there was the scissor lift rally, and then when the EFF didn't do so well, there was a fabulous meme going around of Tutu hanging with his nails onto the edge of
Oh, yes, I did see it. I did see
funny
it.
that way. Neesa, Kreno, I think, doesn't quite know what the Reserve Bank did. He says, why were they asleep at the wheel?
So I think it's easy to point the finger, and I have to say I think the Reserve Bank did step in because the Prudential Authority picked up that there were huge discrepancies in the financial records. And this was a case where everybody from the top to the middle of the banking association was in on it, and everybody was involved in covering it up as it went further and further. And it was almost a case of, as more people came to find out, it just, the payoffs just increased, and eventually it became unsustainable and the figures stopped adding up. And that's when the Prudential Authority started stepping in to say, well, this is not working. And then the municipality funds going into this mutual bank, which was not supposed to be happening. So I don't think we can really lay on the Reserve Bank. I think they did their due diligence, and if the books are crooked, how are you going to know unless you're actually digging deep? And there's some kind of red flag. The other thing is, I think the Reserve Bank also really came to the table with that money that they put forward through Nedbank for the 100,000 Rand settlement towards the victims. And I think there were a few employees, 27 employees, that got 28,000 Rand each or something like that.
Thank you, Neesa. So just a question for you as well. You were talking about the Dondo issue. He was the DG, Dondo Mohajani. Who was the Minister of Finance at the stage? Surely he should have smelt a rat. Was there any sign of oversight, or does that lie with the Prudential Authority, which is in the Reserve Bank?
So I think we have to go back because I'm not even sure when these meetings took place with John Doe. And so I would say it was probably Malema.
So I think it was Malusi Gigaba at the time, huh?
That says
Nene, Malusi Gigaba, Des van Rooyen. It was at the height of state capture. Huh?
Absolutely.
The attentions were elsewhere, I think the answer. I do want to, we have like a few minutes left. I do want to look at heroes. Pauli, who did their work, you know, which people really stood up to a time of high pressure, because from the statement it's clear Danny, Caesar, others, they were bringing real pressure to bear on municipal managers. Who are the heroes of the piece here?
You won't believe it, Ferial, but 2 women.
Aha.
The one
I
was...
believe it completely. I mean, look at this panel.
Absolutely. So the first one in terms of timeline was Mariette Venter, the CFO of the Capricorn municipality in Limpopo. So I wrote about her, and she was the one who tipped off the Reserve Bank that something is weird. She didn't understand why, and she's interestingly not a political animal. She didn't understand the politics of the province even, but she realized that there's pressure on her and she couldn't understand. And after a massive fight, she got her money back, the VBS money back for the municipality from the bank, but she cottoned on that something is not right, and she tipped off the Reserve Bank, and that's why the Reserve Bank realized that there's money in municipalities, and that's why they started asking it back. So that was the trigger. Mariette Venter was the trigger for that one. The second woman that I wrote about in a completely different set of stories was Martha Ngoy from PRASA. She was the legal head of PRASA. She gave advice to the CFO of PRASA not to move money, or not to agree that money must be invested in VBS. And Martha just, I think, saved the country in that way, because the chilling part was that the powers that be, Matodzi was after the state-owned enterprises, because the municipalities were difficult to get to their money and not big enough. So they wanted 2 billion from PRASA. And Martha Ngoy was the one standing in the middle of that, and she advised Yvonne Page, and then Yvonne Page just, there was a lot of pressure on her, and they ensured that the money never went to VBS. And because of that, the trigger was that there was no liquidity. There was a cash flow problem. The VBS managers had to report to the Prudential Authority in March that we have a cash flow problem in March 2018, and that was the moment they put the bank under curatorship.
I'm sending out a heart for Martha and a heart for the other whistleblower there, because I think they did brilliant and brave work in a very difficult time. Pauli, do you fear for your life? Sorry, Queen.
Sorry, Queen, go for it.
Go, Queen.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say the other thing about the Mariette Venter lady you referring to, I read that she was very important, and I don't know if it was in the affidavit, but it was reflected that because of what was happening in Capricorn, there was a journalist who asked questions around it at one of the press briefings. And that's when Matodzi kind of felt as if they were onto him. And he started approaching people from the ANC like Kabelo Matsepe and Danny Caesar to help him with the political influence and to kind of mask what it is they're doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we can see the pressure. Huh? Pauli, do you fear for your life?
No, I don't. I don't think it's serious threats. I am safe. I'm very aware. I was a crime reporter for a long time, and that helps a lot. It's, however, not nice when your father and your mother is angsty about the threats that you receive. You know, that's not nice. But I think in the most instance, mostly these things come on social media, and it's always aimed at your psychology much more. It's to discourage you, and that is the big problem, Ferial. So for young journalists who are not yet so well versed and who do not realize, I mean, you yourself was the target of severe and bitter fighting and threats and name annihilation. And you will know, and the rest of the, especially female journalists, know that It's about stopping you from doing your work, and that's how dangerous that can be.
And then finally, Neesa, how do we prevent another VBS?
So I think oversight, and we've got to encourage more South Africans, the clerks and the auditors and the people behind the lines to be more vigilant and to step forward and be brave enough to speak up. I mean, we can do our job by doggedly following the story and sharing everything we know with the public as and when it comes up and asking the questions that need to be asked, which is great. But if the public can also be brave enough to play their part and speak up. It's not always easy to speak up when everybody else is accepting bribes left, right, and center, and you're the one person in the middle of it. I know, but it has to be done, and if it all starts with you, basically, one person can make the difference.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be on this panel with you and to all of your great questions. More strength to your hands or your mobile phones, because I know that's how we report today. And ahead of Women's Month, this was a real honor. Have a lovely evening to everybody.